Welcome to Stratwatch. Here in episode 9, we'll be covering the King's Row defensive standard on both point A and point B, or on the streets phase for point B. Specifically, we'll be looking at what it looks like when you execute the point A offense correctly, what it looks like when it does get taken out, and how you can recover in the streets phase, or some of the ways that you can recover in the streets phase when you lose point A and lose all of your tempo. We'll be looking at that and more throughout this episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and again, this is Stratwatch episode 9, and we'll be looking at the King's Row defense. Here in episode 9, guys, we'll be looking at the defense for King's Row. So again, we'll be looking at the first point. Here, I would like to show you guys the setup for both of the metas that is going on right now. For right now, you'll see that the previous meta is that you run a sniper from a Widowmaker, and you run a Junkrat as well as a McCree. In the newer meta, they'll be working with Junkrat, Roadhog, and Soldier. But so we'll go ahead and go into the play over here. The defense from Envious is a pretty standard setup and what you'll normally see in these situations. You want to set up with your Junkrat to the right side, as we saw in the previous image. You want to set up with your Widowmaker in the back, with your main few heroes in the center, such as Reinhardt and your Mercy. And then you set up a triple threat defense where you have the Junkrat spam, the sniping from the Widowmaker, as well as the ability of the McCree to get picks. Now, this was before the patch in this film, so this is standard to before that. After that, of course, we'll be looking at what the defense looks like now. But specifically, there's still a lot we can learn here. Why does Envious end up losing this point so quickly? Specifically, I think it's because LG does a very good job patiently and effectively pushing in. Notice how Tailspin is spamming here, but in the top right of the kill feed, Gods is going to get a critical pick after the tank of the defense goes down, Reinhardt. Coco falls here, and then another unfortunate event occurs. Gods takes out Taimu, and then Tailspin ends up killing himself in the duel against Seagull. With those 3 kills happening, and then now Chip Sayin and Harry Hook going down, eventually the Symmetra goes down, and note she goes down with 88% on her ultimate. It's just a series of unfortunate events that leads to Luminosity taking this. Luminosity did play it well, but ultimately Envious had some blunders and mistakes, and Gods himself got critical picks. And so that's how you break the first defense, or what it looks like when you do not successfully set up the hold. Now we'll be going into another game between Luminosity and Splice, and be looking at what Luminosity does in the new meta with the new patch to set up on defense in point A and effectuate a full hold. From there, we'll be moving on into the streets phase and looking at how to effectively defend the streets phase. So here in the second part, guys, we'll be looking at the new meta. What are the differences between the previous and the new? Specifically, you're not going to be running a sniper in the new meta. You're going to be looking for more barrier bursting potential. That's where the Roadhog and the Junkrat in combination come in together. You also don't have the same level of burst that you did running something like a McCree and a Widowmaker. So you rely on a more thorough execution between your team, with the Soldier constantly being insulated from extra damage, and that the absolute terror that Roadhog and Junkrat provide against a barrier setup is very important. So again, here with this defense, what you want to be looking for is how they set up and what options they use to be breaking this defense, or breaking this offense, I apologize. So again, start off first with your proper setup. You still do roughly the same thing, where you have your Junkrat set up at the police building. You have a few heroes set up in the center, primarily the Roadhog and the Reinhardt. And then in the top left, you have the Soldier moving around on the high ground and into the windows. This is something that you should consistently reset to, and again, you can go back to the previous image to see exactly how that setup looks like. But here at the beginning, this is what makes this setup so strong. I think that pushing into this is one of the most terrifying situations to deal with. If you go for a fast push into this, you're going to be running into grenades, Soldier fire, and of course Roadhog spam. If Roadhog does land a hook, he'll pick you off, and then you'll be pushing in 5 versus 6. If you push in slowly, then you're constantly letting them build up ultimates and let them build up a quick teleporter, because the Symmetra is able to spam at you consistently, and of course the other 2 heroes that spam, the Roadhog and the Junkrat, do a substantial amount of damage when their spam connects to targets. But again, the big thing about this new setup is that they are using a lot of barrier bursting, and they don't want the Reinhardt on offense to easily get in position. This is the first part where we can really begin to say that Gods is just absolutely going off. This is this power of this setup. Notice how Gods is just completely isolated from the rest of the team. No one can get to him. He's so insulated. You can't get to him without pushing through the rest. And Pyora eventually does try to get onto him, but you can see that between good tracking, and communication, immediately Esper's over to help him. He doesn't miss much of the shots. God's on the head of Pyre, and Pyre ends up going down, and that's when you push a Winston onto him. This is the benefit of this setup in relation to the old one, is that if the Winston were to jump a Widowmaker, the Widow would have had a much harder time to get onto the soldier. Granted, the soldier does less damage overall because he's constantly peppering consistent damage rather than bursting a target down with a headshot or body shot, but just the amount of damage that he can do, comboed with the spam that is occurring at the front of the fight, makes this defense incredibly strong. Every single time Splice is pushing in, they're losing a hero or two off the bat, or they're just taking substantial damage on their targets. It's hard for them to get a good push going, and if they try to get onto Soldier, they have to run through most of the defense. This is where I think the setup is truly powerful. It puts the offense in a unique double bind where they have to decide to fast break and run into all of the spam and take a risk. They go for a slow break, in which they are just taking all of the spam as well as the fire from Gods. And if they attempt a break that's centered around getting onto Gods and killing him, then ultimately you're passing through a lot of high damage and also pick potential. I'd like to point out that Enigma's hook on the Roadhog is what allows you to protect your squishy backline. You can hook the target back to them as they attempt to go in aggressively. So far, the defense hasn't gotten anything done. Between the spam of Seagull, Pooks, and of course Enigma, it becomes incredibly hard for them to consistently push in, and after 3 minutes of getting stalled out, this is where the defense's ramp or the defense's setup is really stable. You'll also notice here that Splice goes over to a Zenyatta in an attempt to answer this setup. Personally, I don't think this is strictly the right answer, but I don't think it's the wrong answer. If you're looking for ways to break this or ways to deal with this, personally I think right now one of the better ways would be to be using a Widowmaker. The weakest part of this lineup is that it doesn't have a long-range threat answer to deal with the Widowmaker. However, if you push into it, either slow or hard, or with a siege break triple tank, you're still going to be running into a lot of damage, a lot of spam, and you're going to have to kill two tanky targets, both the Roadhog and the Reinhardt, and then you're going to have to deal with some elusive targets. Obviously, the Soldier is incredibly elusive. The Junkrat can bounce around using his concussive mine to get away, and then if Esper is playing properly, he can escape. The offense finally gets a decent push into the background and ends up taking Esper out over here. But again, you can see that the setup is just very hard to break into. Every single time they go for something, there's someone else collapsing around the edge. And this entire time that I've been talking and explaining this, Gods has never died. And he has just been going off in the background, doing consistent damage, shooting away. And again, this is what I want to emphasize about this setup on this point A, is that they have to run through this choke point, and that this defense, the newer meta of the defense, relies on this ability of throughput and just constant denial. Whereas before, previous defenses relied on whether or not Widowmaker would get the picks, or whether or not you had the flashbang to execute a kill. But here it's just the raw throughput of spam plus soldier that allows you to consistently get these kills. And that's what makes this setup so strong in my opinion. You can see here that every single time they're pushing, now although a little less coordinated than ideally speaking, the offense is still attempting good pushes here. And they even keep changing up their strategy to deal with it. Pyre goes over to a Mercy, and they switch over to a Soldier, but ultimately this defensive setup is terrifying and very good on King's Row. Now this is what it looks like when your defense is properly executed. Remember that this was on the new patch versus the older film we're watching in this episode is on the older patch. But the strategy, the concepts are roughly the same. The setup, the spam, who you're picking. The big difference is that the new setup relies on much more throughput and also a high emphasis on that your soldiers consistently hitting headshots or just tracking effectively and laying out consistent damage so that other targets can be cleaned up by either the Junkrat, the Roadhog, or the Symmetra. Thank you so much for watching this part, guys. We'll be moving now into the Streets phase of King's Row. So we just watched what it looks like when you properly execute the defense. Again, I'd like to emphasize the concepts that Luminosity Gaming did a great job holding back, staying back, and spamming out with that setup. And also, Gods never overextended his soldier, and he was always in a proper position. But back to the game where LG was playing against Envious. Envious lost the first point very quickly. And so now they have to recover on the Streets phase. So how does one recover on the Streets phase? Well, if we look at what it looks like to set up on the Streets phase, there are three major locations that you can work with. There's the archway at the beginning, which is very good for a hard contain, which we'll be looking at later on in this. You can set up in the center section where you have the right archway, or you have the hotel in the center with the platform that you can stand on, as well as all the way back to point 2. There is a setup, of course, on the crosswalk, and also setting up around on that high ground to the left of the crosswalk and above the point, giving you 2 separate platforms of second degree verticality over the point. And this is the power of the streets phase and how you want to maximize your defense here. Things that Luminosity does well here. Well, first of all, you'll notice that the switch up to the defense includes Pharah. Pharah on streets phase is much stronger, especially in the newer patch, which we can cover in future episodes. But right now, focus on the fact that Pharah on defense in this map is incredibly useful to spread out the direction and the focus of the offense. Tailspin does an amazing job as a Pharah, consistently staying in the air and dealing out an insane amount of damage without ever really making it easy for the offense to get on him. You'll also note that all of the time that he's getting this great damage off, there is a combination with him and Taimu. We'll be going over this throughout it, but Taimu and Tailspin's team shotting is incredibly effective and important for this. So let's look at the first fight. Tempo here for Envious is on a razor's edge. They have barely stabilized in this fight and barely been able to get the payload to stall out here. They end up getting a few kills and end up actually stopping the payload after what seemed like non-stop aggression and non-stop tempo control from LG. At this point, they do start bleeding members, as of course the spawn is pretty close for the offense, and Luminosity is doing a very good job getting back on the point and controlling it. During that fight, you can go back and watch, but Harry Spin survives twice on low HP, and right there he escapes out and goes back to his team. I cannot emphasize how important it is that Harry makes this decision because they make it back to the payload with about 4 meters remaining to cap. And if Harry Hook had not run away to speed boost his team back, then they may not have gotten there in time, and the offense may have converted on the second point, and the layout of the game would have looked a lot different when LG was on offense. But here, there's an important thing that we need to go over. The combination of ultimates is ultimately what makes a good defense. It's not overuse of your ultimates, because obviously when you're playing on the defense, you want to be thinking about these ideas of not wasting your ultimates. We're going to pause the film here, and we're going to go back and watch that one more time. Normally you guys can go back and watch, but I really want to emphasize how important it is that you combo certain abilities with certain purposes. Watch this film again, especially with Taimu using his Deadeye to start the fight, which prevents any combos coming out from the side of the offense, because they have to worry about his high noon in the far back. Meanwhile, the rest of the offense is pushing forward, and Tailspin is going to use this opportunity to jump up to the top right, basically free of threats, because they have to worry about Taimu as well as the 2 tanks. He's then able to get onto the crosswalk and use his rocket barrage. What I want to emphasize, though, again, is that sometimes on the defense, you don't want to use all your ultimates. In fact, in this case, they do end up using all their ultimates. But why is that? Well, because if you can use 2, 3, or all of your ultimates minus your resurrection to regain tempo in a situation where you have not had tempo all game, it's probably worth it. And Envious displays an understanding of this. So they've used most of their ultimates, but they push forward slightly, knowing that they won't get picked off, just to get some extra harass and poke out because they used all those ultimates. They do end up getting a few for this next fight, but again, I want to emphasize that they use both Deadeye and Rocket Barrage just to secure that point. Here they end up pushing out, and Seagull's ultimate is a little bit awkward. I think this was because of great initiation from the side of Envious. They end up going in and taking out Milo before he's able to get an Earth Shatter, and they push back the rest of the offense, specifically Enigma, to the far left side, and ultimately Seagull comes back into the fight, thinking that they might be able to turn it around, but he's isolated and ends up getting taken out. But note how Envious is coming back here right now. They are not over-aggressing, and they're taking their time and they're stepping back. Taimu specifically here, this is a style of play that you can emulate in your scrims and in your custom games, or in your, public games. Notice how he gets on the payload while they're waiting for the push out, spamming left clicks and being ready to effectuate that kind of hold. But as soon as the offense is on the point, he backs off and forces them to overextend into him if they want to kill the McCree. While that's happening, we'll have picture-in-picture during this, is that you guys can see that Tailspin goes off with another ultimate at the same time. Again, they're comboing the Barrage and the Deadeye to maintain tempo. They understand that using both of these ultimates together could be risky, but they're already in a situation where they're possibly going to lose the point, or we're going to lose the point. As of now, due to the decision making, they've pushed the point back to here. And now I want to highlight Tailspin. If you want to play effective Pharah on defense here, there are two important things that I think come up in Tailspin's play. First of all, you'll notice that he's constantly standing on the edges of the fights. And he's boosting in, firing a rocket or two, not many more, and then skipping back behind wall, and then jumping back out. He's also always staying at a higher degree of verticality than his teammates, and when he goes for a rocket barrage, he definitely gets behind the enemy first by flying over them in the middle of a fight. Again, it's this idea that Tailspin is operating slightly independently than the rest of his team, and forcing the offense to account for him as an independent threat. And so now Envious has effectively defended the streets, using what is basically the standard composition with a Winston Reinhardt, Pharah McCree, and then your double support. This is a composition you can run on old and new patch. It is a very effective and efficient composition, but again, what is so important that you realize that Envious is doing is that they are independently operating with the Pharah and the Mercy, and that the rest of their defense is operating kind of aggressively when needed, but is waiting for the proper aggression. They don't push out while the payload is up. But when the payload starts to get away from the checkpoint and they felt like they have tempo and they have control of the map, they go for a full hard contain. They move up with the payload and they establish it based upon that. And so now with 45 seconds remaining on the clock, they opt for a complete hard contain because they feel that they've regained control of this map, and in all honesty, they have. But why or how is, again, this idea that they waited for the right opportunity to jump in on those last few fights, but on the previous fights, the crisis management and decisions of Harry Hook to get back to his team in time, and also the decisions of comboing Deadeye and Barrage to make it hard to isolate both of one of the ultimates and deal with them. Again, this runs contra to the normal thinking that you don't want to overlap defensive abilities, or ultimates, damage ultimates. But if you can use them to reset tempo and regain control of the map, it makes a much, much bigger difference. So again, guys, with this defense on the streets phase, even if you lose all of your tempo, even if the enemy team gets the cart to within a few meters of your checkpoint, if you can effectuate these kinds of defensive holds and trust in your teammates, then that's what allows you to win games. Again, Envious is using a lot of trust between Tailspin and Taimu to effectively team shot, as well as combo their ultimates properly, and they're also focusing on using the map to their advantage. And that is the critical part about running Pharah on defense in King's Row. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Stratwatch. Again, we covered King's Row defense, both in point A and point B, and I will be going over the Foundry in the future. Again, though, I wanted to emphasize that the difference between the new patch and the old patch, I wanted to look at the importance of being able to regain tempo and control it on the second streets phase, even after you lose the first point, and how disgusting a proper hold can look on the first point of King's Row. Again, thank you so much, guys, for watching. If you would like more updates, please follow above on the channel, or subscribe to the channel above. It gives you guys updates of when I post casting VODs or when I post new Stratwatches, whether email or however you want it set up. The second thing is you guys can follow me on Twitter or follow me on any other social media and get constant updates about what I am doing. As well, you guys can check out the previous episodes of Stratwatch at my VODs below. But again, thank you so much for watching. These episodes are so much fun to make, and I'm glad to know that people enjoy watching them, and I will continue to be making these episodes in the future. Again, thank you so much, guys, and have a great day.